Om Prakritim Paramam Abhayam Vardam Nadarupadaram Janatapaharam Sharanagata Sevaka Toshakarim Pranamami Param Jananim Jagatam Gunahina Sutan Aparada Yutan Kripayadya Samudara Mohagatan Taranim Bhava Sagara Parakarim Pranamami Param Jananim Jagatam. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. O Mother Supreme in human form, granter of boons and of bliss, distress of our souls removest thou, givest us contentment and peace. Thy children who offer all to thee, do thou makest them content and free. O great Mother of the worlds, be our salutations ever unto thee. Do thou this day save thy children, bound in Maya's chains. Increase virtue, take vice away. Destroy all blemishes with the power of thy name. For thine is the only ship to ferry across this earthly sea. O great Mother of the worlds, be our salutations ever unto thee. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavo Vahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvisho Vahai. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. May Brahman, divine reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. We are so happy and also fortunate to be able to be here together for another series of classes in Hawaii at the SRV chapter here in Waimea on the Big Island, out in the middle of these beautiful jewel islands of essence. And that's where Mother lives, called Mani Dvipa. Divine Mother has her own realm, just like Krishna and Shiva and other great beings have these internal lokas. So Mani Dvipa is that jewel island of essence. So Hawaii really represents that very much for us on the physical level. A beautiful place that we live, and we are coming to you live streaming from this location. And as I said, very pleased to be able to do that with a series of classes that we're all having a hard time remembering the title of. We're just calling it the 5 T's, but when I thought it up, it was the problem of transgression. That's 1 T. And then you have transmigration, because if you transgress dharmic laws, moral laws, and so forth, then you end up transmigrating to the kingdoms of heaven within and back out, or to lower lands, even the patalas they're called, or hell realms, back to earth again with your ancestors or with according to your karmas. So that's transmigration, it's called, or reincarnation. So that's 2 T's, or 2 trans. And there's a third trans called transformation. You want to get out of the problem of transitioning. There's another trans actually to say. Then you want to transform yourself. And we know in our tradition that we do that with sadhana, or spiritual self-effort practices. You all probably remember our rust of minds from teachings from Lord Buddha and so forth, our Bucket of Rusty Nails series we did recently, where the mind gets rusty if you don't keep it in sadhana every day, and tend to forget God and fall into worldly ways. And that can then lead to problems over a lifetime and for this transitioning that you do. But beyond transitioning and transformation, then you get to this transcendence. That's the fourth T, or fourth trans we're talking about here. And transcendence is a little one-sided, philosophically speaking. I mean, many of the greatest teachers, especially recently, Swami Vivekananda has said that put your moksha off for a while, that is your liberation, and give me a lifetime or two just to help the world and its suffering beings. So there's a higher turn to realizing your true nature as formless essence. Arupa Chaitanya, they call sometimes, or Swarupa. And that is to, yes, definitely go and get your Jivan Mukta, get your freedom in this lifetime. But then, as Holy Mother said, Sri Sharda Devi, please turn around and help others along the way. Maybe come back again, as Swamiji is asking us to do, Swami Vivekananda, and help other beings also reach the goal of human existence, which is enlightenment or self-realization, some words we use for it. Nirvana, moksha, mukti. So that's, transcendence is a step on that, but we say it's one-sided because there's another trans that we're looking at, which is the fifth T, which is called transparency. It probably is best explained to us via the teachings of Zen Buddhism, like, say, maybe one of the teachings of ox herding. There's 10 stages of herding your ox, and somewhere about the 7th or 8th, the ox is your lost human nature. It goes away and gets lost in the forest, the jungle, and you have to go looking for it. So there's 10 stages of ox herding. We've probably seen that chart in our classes here before. But somewhere about the 7th or 8th, you find the ox, and you and the ox are living back at the farm in your hut, and everything is well and good. You have a sattvic life, and everything is balanced again, and you know your true nature and all that. But something is missing, and that's going to the marketplace with helping hands, they say, and coming back. And so you leave your transcendence and your happiness, your contentment, in order to get this helping hands in the marketplace. Well, that's a kind of transparency, because you've already found out that the world is, as Vedanta says, unreal, that it only exists in your mind, and all the things in it, objects and so forth, also exist as thoughts in your mind before they exist as objects in matter. Our whole last series, and last week we were taking a break after that series, was about spiritual self-storage, if you remember, is what we were calling it. And so all of these things means everything is stored back in the human mind. All knowledge lies within you, or the kingdoms of heaven are within you, are ways in which Hinduism and Christianity have put that. Great souls like Krishna and Buddha and so forth. So if you have this ability to attain transparency, then that's where you get these teachings about the three worlds get transcended and dualities get transcended. You're still amidst them and among them, but you don't feel them. It's sort of like being beyond Maya, but your body is still in Maya. So your mind is in Mahamaya, but your body and senses and all, they're still operating in Maya, or Prakriti. Sri Krishna says that in the Gita. Actions take place only in Prakriti. Actions do not take place in your soul. So he's talking about the Atman, or the Purusha, words that were more prominent in his time, which is quite a long time ago, even well before Buddha. And so he's talking about these levels of consciousness inside of you that are beyond transcendent and immanent. They're beyond gross and subtle and even causal, because causal is where the seeds are. So you've gone beyond the first three worlds, or the first three bodies, gross, subtle, and causal, and you've attained transparency, turiya, or samapatti, Yoga Vasishtha used to call it, asamvedana. There are words for it in some of the Indian darshanas that explain that this kind of transparency where you're there but you're not there kind of thing. So anyway, those 5 T's, or trans, are what we're going to be looking at. I saw them in stages, and the first one is transgression. Now, transgression, there's a word for it in English that we hate to use, called sin. And when Vedanta looks at sin or transgression, as we know, it's a resist not evil kind of slant that they're taking on it. Or, again, they know that all actions take place in nature, so the actions you did that were sinful, so-called, you did them in nature, and you did them with the mind and the thought process, but your soul remained stainless, even when the sins were being committed by the body-mind mechanism. So this is why Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Brahman can't be defiled by anything, by the tongue of man, or by the actions of mankind, even by the thoughts of mankind. Brahman stays pure and perfect at all times, beyond time. So there's nothing you can do to besmirch that. See, that's your perfect, pristine, stainless, birthless, deathless, timeless, causeless divine nature, Atman or Paramatman, Buddha nature, if you will. So that you need to again connect into, like the spiritual self-storage idea we had the last series of classes. So with that said then, transmigration is a better word that Vedanta likes to use, because sin to them is not a black mark in the soul. And it's also not something that you can necessarily free yourself from by going to a savior. Because where's the savior for the last couple thousand years? You'd have to be a very facile spiritual aspirant to find the Christ within you in order to get rid of sin, because Christ has not appeared, they say, for some 2,000 years now, and they're still waiting for his second coming. Luckily, in India, we don't have that problem, because the avatar is probably there every 500 years, and it's the same soul incarnating again and again, the divine couple, and so forth. Like for us, Ramakrishna and Sri Sharda Devi, in this day and age now, it's another appearance of that Kali avatar in the Kali Yuga, this present time. But my point being, transmigration, or I'm sorry, now I'm getting the T's mixed up already. This transgression is something that's an apparent problem, and it's not going to be that difficult for you to wipe the slate clean again, unless you let the mind get so impeded by transgression that you keep sinning again. So like we say, you keep cutting yourself, and then a scar tissue grows, and you cut yourself in the same place, scar tissue grows. That's called a samskara in Sanskrit. So the scar tissue gets so thick that there's nothing you can do to ever heal it. We'll talk about that later in the teaching on the granthis, or knots. Granthis in our tradition mean knots in your body, which cause disease, but those knots in the body, via your nerves and your blood vessels and so forth, are really caused, and this is the deeper healing we talk about than just physical healing from doctors in the West and so forth, medicines, or even herbs and elixirs and so forth. These problems in the granthis in your body, in your nadis, your gross nadis, channels, nerves, blood vessels and so forth, breathing, lungs, are caused by a subtler kind of knot in your prana. And if you can get the prana, if you can arrest it and make it flow again in the right direction, arrest it, pull it back, like Patanjali says, from grabbing onto the objects and desiring them and becoming attached to them and suffering and enjoying from them, it's all yogic. Pull that prana from the eyes, ears, tongue, and so forth back and store it up in your heart, then you can start breaking through some of these granthis in your physical being. And in order to do that more effectively, there are knots in your mind, and then there are knots in your intellect, philosophical knots. Bhranti darshana, the father of yoga called it, that is, Bhranti, delusion, darshana, means this unclear seeing, foggy perception in the mind. You're not thinking correctly. And then there's also then knots in your spiritual body, come to find out. that are difficult to penetrate through, so that you can get enlightenment. This is happening at a much higher level, these knots. So these knots get subtler and subtler, and I'll show you those probably after the break today. They're like big dams, and father of Samkhya Yoga, Kapila, even called them pragbara. It means a kind of dam. So due to these dams inside of your body-mind mechanism, as Vedanta says, consciousness cannot flow through certain obstructions. Like, say there's obstruction of you getting beyond your ancestors and getting transcendence. So you have to keep transmigrating because you can't get transformation. And you work on transformation so you can get transcendence. So these third and fourth important T's that we're talking about never get accomplished because you're hitting against these blocks of your ancestors and the karma that has to go with your ancestors. I mean, they want to be reborn to have more enjoyment of the objects. They want lands, they want power, they want drinks, they want food for the senses and for the ego. And when the spiritual aspirant sees this, he gets rather averse, he gets shocked. He or she all of a sudden say, gee, I think maybe I should be going a different direction. Maybe I should be going less instead of more. I should be renouncing instead of accumulating, and make the whole thing lighter so that my consciousness can flow through these apertures and through these channels. Channels connect to apertures, like your eyes and your ears and so forth. There are channels connecting to those, along which the prana flows. And if you don't know about prana, which Swami Vivekananda, when he came to the West, told us that that was one of the things that was missing in our tradition. We didn't know about prana, and we didn't know about tanmatra. Tanmatra means objects in your dream state, basically. And you're thinking dreams are just figments of your imagination, but actually the tanmatras are 5 elements inside of your mind that turned into the 5 elements out here as you transmigrated. See, you brought them back again, air, earth, fire, water, ether inside. You brought them back again outside and solidified them. There's an equation for that, of course. I mean, Maya plus human mind plus 5 elements in nature equal the worlds. And the whole process of it is called sankalpa. It's desire-based imagining or projecting. I sometimes use that word, projecting. Shushti, so the secret of projection of the mind, is Tantra uses that word. So just a little foreknowledge and my usual preamble, if you will, about the 5 T's that we're going into over the next 4 weeks. I think it's a 4-week series of classes. So we'll probably do Transmigration next week, but sin and transgression we'll do this week. So back to sin. Now back to sin. So back to sin, in our tradition, and I'm talking about pretty much overall the umbrella of Vedanta, Yoga, Tantra, Buddhism too. They look at the worlds as being unreal or projections of the mind, not ultimately real, constantly changing, if you'd rather use that. So like Christ said, you can't build your house on shifting sands. He means you can't really lay your head on earth. Birds have nests, foxes have holes, but you don't have any place to lay your head here for very long. So you've got to realize the changing nature of things. And that's one of the things the yogi or yogini will do right away. And when they realize that everything is changing nature, they'll withdraw from it. And they'll get their freedom based on understanding changeless reality, Brahman. Allah, Buddha nature, however you want to say it in your tradition. So when you talk about sins, in our tradition we'd call that word transgression, and the way we would approach it would not be necessarily through morality. It would be more through Dharma teaching. So what you want to do is to meditate on these things. Now, what are the sins? or the transgressions, pretty much 6, 8, 4, another 6. Basically, you're talking about the 6 passions of lust, anger, greed, envy, jealousy, pride, and delusion. Or you're talking about the 8 fetters of shame and greed and all these things. I have them on this chart, which we'll look at in a minute. Then you're talking about 6 transformations: birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. And then you're talking about 4 deadly traps, and greed and grief and all these things. So then you might talk about 5 kleshas, and you might talk about 9 antaryayas in yoga. So these are all these problems in relativity that the human mind have come out of the human mind, and then when they manifest in life, they begin to blame all sorts of other things for that, instead of knowing that it came out of their own mind. So their own lust, their own greed, their own anger, their own envy, their own jealousy, their own grief, their own pride, their own whatever it is a negative element in the mind. It's come from the mind. And the mind, of course, has individual mind, and then it has collective mind. So it's not just the problems of your mind, but it's the problems of your mind in association with how many 7 or 8 more billion people on your particular loka, and then billions of ancestors that are being reborn, transitioning, or transmigrating, the second T, back and forth in the body, taking bodies and bodies and bodies based upon their past lifetimes. And missing that third important T. What's that again? Transformation. Yeah. So if you're not working on yourself, to put it in a kind of current Western psychological coding, if you're not working on yourself, then you're treading water at best. And working on yourself would be to transform your human nature into divine nature, or at least transform it into a heroic nature. Remember the teaching we had about pasu, virya, and daiva. Animalistic nature, pasu, people who have animalism still. Heroic nature, beings who begin to transcend their animalistic nature and work for the good of others. And then divine, people who become subject to this 5th T, which would mean transparency. They become rather transcendent of the processes in nature and transparent to them. A beautiful song in India says, you know, when the illumined soul dies, kama, karma, and the god of and Yama, the god of death, all go looking for him, but they can't find him. Why is that? Because he's transparent. Nothing can find him anymore. I'll sing you songs about it. I'll sing you verses out of the Jnanamritam Stotram that the Advaita sings about it. He's a perfectly transcendent being. So we're talking karma can't find him, and kama can't find him. Karma is cause and effect. Kama is desire. And Yama can't find him. Yama is death. Those 3 things go looking for an illumined soul after he leaves the body. Where is he? So they come back, wipe him off their slate. Say, oh, he's not on the register on the Akashic record anymore, if you want to put it that way. He's not in the book of souls that need to transmigrate, in Yama's book. He's not on the in the book of desires, what people want to fulfill. He's transcended that. So transcendence, then transparency. So we'll talk more about that in the 4th class. I've got some things to show you about transparency, which are very beautiful. So here's what we're looking at when we talk about transgression. What I'm trying to come about here to actually say is that in Vedanta, we meditate on these. You know the difference between that and worrying about them? The difference between that and brooding on them? The difference between that and fearing them? The difference between that and putting them off to the future? Cleverly escaping them? See, so these are some 4 or 5 things that people do with these things. Now, Sri Ramakrishna had a very beautiful teaching about lust. He was talking about here lust, anger, greed, delusion, vanity, and jealousy. Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, and Matsarya. These are listed in Bhagavad Gita and other places. The 6 passions, India gathered them all together into a nice package for you to know about them. So otherwise, they're random. Well, one day you're lustful, and then that goes away, so you don't think about it much. But you committed some actions while you were lustful, and that karma's coming back at you. The next day you get angry, and that goes away, but you committed some action and anger, and that comes back on you later. And the same with greed. You were greedy one day. So it's not like you're all 6 all the time, but all 6 are in you, and they're showing their ugly heads like a hydra, many-headed snake, every once in a while in your life. And the actions that you did when those snake heads came up, that was when those passions came forward, you're responsible for, and you'll have to pay for. You'll have to pay for the use of this body to the last farthing. Who said that? Shri Sharada Devi E Mahamate. You've all seen that beautiful YouTube video we put out, and that beautiful bhajan to Holy Mother. So Holy Mother said that. You pay to the last farthing, which is rather humorous because a farthing is an English denomination of money. So the English were there in India at the time. And so she didn't say rupee, you have to pay to the last rupee. Or anam would probably be the best way to put that. So that karma is coming back at you. So how to deal with that in our traditions, Buddhism, Tantra, Yoga, Vedanta, and so forth, we meditate on them. We face them off. Patanjali wants you to face the brutes. And that's the only way you're going to acknowledge, number 1, acknowledge that they're there. Number 2, acknowledge that they're coming from inside of you. Sure, there are influences outside that will help bring them out of you. But if those influences approached a soul that didn't have anger and lust, then he wouldn't respond to them. You've heard that teaching before. If they weren't already in you, you wouldn't understand them. And this is particularly the state of the mind of a Jesus or a Krishna or a Ramakrishna. People would come up and with anger or with greed or with lust, and these souls couldn't recognize those things. They just see the Atman. So this wasn't pretending away their imperfections. This was seeing their Atman, seeing their true nature. Oh, you've made a few mistakes. You are an adulteress. We won't stone you right now. Why don't you go and sin no more? So it wasn't a black mark on their soul that was that needed to be punished, and that would then all of a sudden the punishment fits the crime, and then all of a sudden you get free. You see, of the karma. That's probably not going to happen. Most people are going to go and commit another cut on that scar tissue. See? And if they don't intend to, and their intentions are good, they'll probably still do it anyway because it's in the mind, isn't it? I did it once, now I'm subject to it again. So this is precisely why, instead of being ashamed of them, because shame is one of the deadly traps, that's another chart. Instead of being ashamed of it, or just regretting it and doing nothing about it, or trying to pretend it away, as so many people do, you take it up and you meditate on it. And so you can do this with everything. You pretend like your ego, you should meditate on it. Your death, you should meditate on it. This is facing off consciously with what's inside of you. So if you bring out what's inside of you, what you bring out will be good for you. If you don't bring out what's inside of you, what you don't bring out might cripple you. This is St. Thomas. They finally found his gospel, evidently. So St. Thomas said that, one of Christ's disciples. And it echoes Samkhya Yoga's 4 noble combats. I'll show you that chart probably next week. It's how to bring out what's good in you and how to stifle, and destroy what's evil in you so that it doesn't manifest. There are 4 noble combats according to the Samkhya teaching. So the Samkhya teaching so early on, a couple thousand years prior to Christ, and then souls like in Christendom, like St. Thomas and so forth, had this knowledge of how to deal with sins. So you can't just confess it necessarily and have it go away. even if you were to confess it to an illumined soul like Jesus, it doesn't mean necessarily it would go away. Be a lamp unto yourself. You have to face it off and be done with it. So the kind of truth of all of this is that only you can free yourself. Nobody else can free you. Because you can say, well, somebody might bestow grace upon me. The hand of a great soul might come upon me, and that might free you to a certain extent, but it might be that it might only give you a blessing for a while, and then all of a sudden you're back dealing with your karma again. This happens with so many, in cases of so many people. So when great souls find out about this, like say Sri Ram, then he becomes, as a young teenager, very despondent. Now we know the similarities between Lord Buddha 550 years before Christ and Sri Ram several thousand years before that they both were sons of kings, and they both left the palace for the first time, saw suffering, and became despondent about it, and gave up worldly life because of all the suffering. They didn't want to live in the lap of luxury while people outside the gates were suffering. They were too sensitive. Their souls were too sensitive for that. They had too much compassion for suffering people. So as it manifested in Sri Ram's life, in the court of King Dasarata, he began to see, as he went on pilgrimage with his brother and his half-brothers, Lakshmana, Satrugya, you know the Ramayana, or Adhyatma Ramayana, out of which some of these teachings come. Yoga Vasishta has a version of it, which I'm drawing from here. So when he went on pilgrimage, he ran into these people who were suffering horrible things. Some of them had deformities, some of them had diseases, some of them were purposefully evil, doing ill-considered actions and harming others, and later themselves suffering. So he didn't just go out in the world and see this perfect and very fine place. That doesn't happen. Nobody who is an enlightened soul has gone out in the world and had a very good time. Good times are all over when you realize that the world is unreal and ever-changing, and you don't have any place to lay your head there. Now you have to go into the second world, which is your mind, basically. Leave matter and go into the world of thoughts, which caused matter, and do some altercations in there. Clean the attic, see? Do some spring cleaning. So that's what's called spiritual self-effort or practice, and that's transformation. That's the third T. I'm trying to make these connections early on before I actually plunge into these charts. But if we look at this chart first, now that I've introduced Sri Ram, and that we will look at some of his reactions to that. Then we'll find this chart. And this chart here has got a facelift. We like to show it new in its colorized version, called the 6 Transformations, 6 Passions, 6 Billows, and 8 Fetters. The lists have been gathered together for you, so for ease. You can memorize them, or you can look at them and say, I don't have any problem with those 5, but that one gives me a big headache, you see. Because there are good people who suffer bad things, and so this is one of the answers to that. Why do good people suffer bad things? Because there's still some guna, or some karma, or some passion, or some desire, or some ill-considered thought and act that are still bothering them time to time and surfacing out of nowhere and ruining their day, or ruining their week, or ruining their month. And so oftentimes unbeknownst to them, I've known people who are very good people all of a sudden have a very bad turn in life and live the rest of their lives in dis-ease, whether it's mental or physical. I've seen that happen even in my own family occasionally. So we know that these things surface out of nowhere and cause apparently good people problems. So that's why we meditate on them. We have to make sure that the residue associated with them is totally cut away and neutralized. If you still have traces of poison from a snake going through you, or traces of poison from the drugs you took in the 60s, or traces of poison of thought that you had when you were sent to prison, or whatever the case is, there's little residues of poison still in your system. Those are the things you have to look for if you're a basically good moral person, and find a remedy for them, a remedy for snake bite, a remedy for negativity, and so forth. So we do practice with a pure mind. We take and look at these things so you can see what the 6 transformations are: Jayati, Asti, Vardhate, Jara, Kshara, and Mara. So we have birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. Those are the famous 6 transformations. Now, each one will take really quickly, according to Sri Ram. He says, beings rush to welcome the birth of a child, overlooking serious factors like delusion and suffering, which play into embodiment in Maya. So it's always been sort of an eye-opener, if you will, to see people celebrating birthdays, but nobody celebrates death days. Dalai Lama said once to me in person, well, we Tibetans look forward to the day of our death. It's like if you come into the body, then you're doing time in prison. That's how the people in prison tell me when I go teach Vedanta in prison. There's a book called We're All Doing Time that was put out by a teacher who taught in prison that I knew of. So when I went in there, people knew about this book, and he knew that they're doing time in prison, but people out here are also doing time in the prison of the body-mind mechanism. These have lots of channels running through them, and they're dammed up. I feel like going to the knots chart right now and showing you that, but I'm going to bide my time and be more patient. So you see, if a child is born, they all rush to celebrate, but they don't know what's in that mind of that child yet. They don't know whether it's a future avatar, whether it's an axe murderer, or whether it's a lawyer. I won't make that joke. Or a doctor, or whatever it is. There's an admixture of things in the subconscious mind of that child. Because why? Because it took a birth in a body, and that's usually based on desire. Very, very seldom you'll find a soul born who has no desires. Why bother? So desire is at the root of this. If the desires are higher and better, then you have a finer and more refined soul, and can be of help to society. Otherwise, you're, how they say, you're acting as a problem, to the solution. You're in the way of your own progress and the progress of others. So, Sri Ram, the avatar of the Dwapara Yuga, says this basically. Everyone rushes to see the birth of a child and celebrates it, but they don't know the factors that played into that child being born in the body. And if you can raise it in the Dharma, with Dharmic parents and teachings, teach it to meditate, teach it to find out about the negativities of the mind that everyone's subject to, then you've got a person who's a candidate for that third T, is the transformation. We want to see more beings working on themselves and transforming themselves while the getting is good. That is, in this body, while you still have health, while you still have good energy, while you still have an ear open to Dharmic teachings, and while you still have the faith that there is a higher reality in the world called God or Brahman. Now the second one is Asti, growth. He says, remember, teachings of Sri Ram, the illusion of growth is one of the Mayic elements which attaches men and women to the ever-changing realm of name and form. So that's a very beautiful way of putting it. If you're tiny and you grow stages, somebody's measuring you on the wall, your parents are measuring you as you grow up the body, you begin to think, I'm growing. I was small, now I'm older, now I'm larger, I'm growing. But the whole thing is in Maya. The growth is in Maya. Your soul does not grow. Your soul does not evolve. Your soul is not in the body. There's certainly not a body. So what you have here is the illusion of growth, basically. And if you believe in it, if you're transparent, of course, you wouldn't believe in it, right? That since you're still transmigrating, you believe in it, and that's playing into the transmigratory process of taking more bodies. I'm going to grow again. Oh, I'm getting old, I'm shrinking. See? Well, I guess I'm going to have to shrink again. See? So, birth and death, growth and old age and decay are some of the problems that Sri Ram reads the Riot Act about. Vardhate, disease. He says, outside in the relative world, there are diseases which, though they have their origin in the subtle mind, manifest harshly in the body. So he draws our attention to the fact that our diseases come from the mind. His teacher was Lord Vashishta when he was just in his teens, this fully illumined seer who was the head priest of King Dasaratha's court. And so he taught the young Ram about this problem that all diseases originate in the mind. That's one of Lord Vashishta's signature teachings. Patanjali, at one end of the spectrum, the great healer of all levels of your being. Before that, Lord Vashishta, the other bookend, earlier in time, also had all levels of your being in mind, including the physical. So he researched disease, meditated on disease. See what I mean? I mean, it's not only just to get rid of your own problems with these things that you meditate, but you might come upon some secrets and some teachings that will help others if you meditate upon them. Then you can be of use to your society, to your family, and to your ancestors and so forth by pointing it out to them and helping them get free of disease, get free of even the thought of disease. You know, hypochondriacs and so forth. I mean, maybe some of them aren't really sick, but they're going around saying, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm sick. So they really make themselves sick. It's the same with sin. If you go around, Sri Ramakrishna said, saying, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, that's not a good thing to say to yourself, because you'll convince yourself of that lie. You could say, I have sinned, but I'm going to remove it by such and such a practice. Then I'm going to have to meditate and find out what kind of blocks are in my being and put a laser on them. Put the laser of spiritual practice on them. So when we talk about growth and disease, we're talking about limitations, problems. Birth is a problem in our tradition. Hinduism and Buddhism both consider it a problem. It's something that's maybe not desirable, something that you're going to want to transform and transcend. Because if you do, you can come back to the body and live a life which is beneficial to all beings and to yourself without these thinking these are real. See, so when we meditate on them, then we're taking them apart and seeing that they are a part of nature. When people brood upon them, they're making them more real. It's a very key teaching, which is the difference between reformist religion and Dharma. There's a vast difference between those two. And the same goes for Jara, old age. Set upon by old age, a man is hardly even able to contemplate the soul's passage to higher worlds, much less meditate on reality. Sri Ram's teachings, in a very sparse and economical amount of words, cut right to the quick of the matter every time. And so he's saying here, he's bringing in immediately higher worlds that the soul can transition to if they get rid of these transgressions, and also meditation upon divine reality, which is non-dual. What about those two things? Well, old people with disease go to the doctor or go to their friends who, for some sympathy. But do these friends or doctors ever tell them, have you been meditating on God lately? No, they say, here, take these pills. Do they ever talk about higher worlds? Even your psychiatrists in the West? Oh, you should meditate on the higher worlds, where Sri Ram sports blissfully with his devotees. Why are there so many songs and so many beautiful poems, you see? Meditate, O mind, meditate on Sri Krishna. and his devotees in Vaikuntha, where he sports blissfully with all these devotees. Kabir's song, for instance, and so forth. Dive deep, O mind, into the ocean of God's beauty. Does anyone ever tell you to do that? Oh, you have old age problem? Well, try meditating upon divine reality. What about that as a prescription on your bottle? See? Give you a medicine, your doctor one day gives you a medicine, he happens to be a Vedantist, you see. You take it home, you open it up, nothing in it. What kind of medicine is this? You look on the label. Take 1, 2, 3 meditations every day, you see. So you put the bottle down and you meditate on divine reality. What else is going to get you beyond old age? You think old age is going to magically be transformed by a medicine? It's one of the 6 transformations. So you're going to have to take it to task and rise above it. In other words, realize that you're birthless and deathless, the way the scriptures have been telling you for countless aeons. How about decay? With the life force literally squeezed out of the various human vessels. Then comes the collapse and dissolution of the human frame into dust. So you could say it's very pessimistic, but not if you meditate upon it. My body will turn to dust, see? But my soul will remain eternal. And so you have to meditate on the real and give up brooding on the unreal. That's all. It's just a simple thing. Another prescription you can get from an illumined doctor. And then Mara, death. The grim reaper, Yama, moves among the young and aging alike, gathering heads like a farmer picking ripe melons during a harvest season. So just, there's a pumpkin, there's a pumpkin, there's a pumpkin. Remember our chart on the pumpkins 2 weeks ago? All the pumpkin heads we were looking at with the seeds in them for rebirth and everything. Well, it's just like melons at harvest season. The farmer will go out there with his scythe and his knife and he'll just cut them and reap them. So this is what Sridham is saying death is doing all the time. Quite often to gray-headed or bald pumpkins who are suffering old age and decay. So the 6 transformations, they're put together in a lump, so you can look at them all and measure them up and see that your body is going through them and accept that. But what you don't accept is that you're that. You accept that that's happening to your body, but your mind created your body. If you had this one fact in place, then you could go to your mind and appeal to it. Oh mind, please quit brooding on the 6 transformations. Let's meditate on our divine nature instead and transcend these. The 4th T, we're going to be talking about soon. Let's look at the 6 passions. We already talked about them. Lust, anger, greed, delusion, vanity, and jealousy. The 6 billows: hunger, thirst, grief, delusion, dotage, and death. So basically those last 2 of the 6 billows, dotage and death, match 2 of these 6 transformations, because this is a Buddhist teaching and this is a Hindu teaching. Now, the 8 fetters. You don't really need to say anything about the 6 passions and 6 billows because everyone's subject to them. I've already given a little preamble on how you deal with them. In fact, I was about to say that Sri Ramakrishna used to say, how do you deal with lust and anger? They're a part of your mind. You can never get rid of them. So minimize them. So if you can concentrate on them, minimize them to the least possible common denominator in your thinking process, then you open up all this other time and space for Brahman and for higher pursuits. And so most people would be able to shrink them down to something that's not a problem to them anymore. And that's not hiding from them. It's not like repression. It's a red flag word for a lot of Western psychologists. It's mastery of them. You've mastered them because you shrink them down by your willpower to no problem. They might occur to your mind the way a burnt rope occurs to your mind. Before you burnt the rope with the rope of lust with meditation, you had a problem with it. But after you burnt it with meditation and practices, all of a sudden it turns into a burnt rope, and it looks like a rope still, but it can't bind you anymore. Is another teaching by Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Sharda Devi about lust, anger, greed, envy, jealousy, pride, and so forth. Now, there are 8 fetters here. Vesha, Gotra, Baya, Varna, Hri, Darpa, Gopaniyata, and Shoka. Basically, hatred, lineage, fear, that is pride of lineage, fear, pride of caste, Varna, shame, pride, Gopaniyata is secrecy, and Shoka is grief. So you want to be Ashoka. There's a Swami we had in the West recently named Swami Ashokananda, was a great teacher. So you want these 8 fetters and 6 passions to be matters under your control. You're aware of them, and you see the effects of them in your body, but in your mind you want them as far diminished as you can possibly manage, so that they don't pose any problems for you in life, and also, like weeds that you deny water to, they begin to die. If you give them water, if you give them attention, it's like watering the weed. But you only want to water the flowers and not the weeds. So if you can do this without the problem of repression or hiding or guilt or shame and these things, you do it actually consciously with your own willpower. That's called transformation, 3rd T. And then you can rid yourself of these problems. So, quote at the bottom says, preoccupation with relative existence is to be transcended. When impending factors such as the 6 transformations, the 6 passions, the 6 billows, the 8 fetters, the 3 gunas, and the pairs of opposites besiege mankind at every step, all of them attended by constant change and pervasive suffering, how desirable can worldly life be? So the soul is like a kid going to school, and he's let out to recess, but how much can he enjoy himself at recess when all of these things are his playmates? That's how I used to put it. You've got lust, anger, greed, envy, jealousy, pride, shame, grief, delusion. All these things are your playmates. They're in your mind, and you're taking them about with you everywhere you go, and you're denying their existence except when they arise in you. Then they rise in you and they go away, so you say, oh, it must not have been a problem. But those actions that you did that caused them to rise, and those actions that you perpetrated while they were in operation, have left a mark on you called karma. And if you had neutralized them to as much as possible, then you'd be very careful how you conduct yourself in life, and these things wouldn't backfire on you later. So a quick study of the 6 transformations, 6 passions, 6 billows, and 8 fetters under the heading of transgressions. And so difference between transgression, Vedantically, yogically speaking, and the problem of sin and damnation, which we've been raised with, unfortunately, in Western country. So we need to look at that very seriously and see how these are not black marks on your soul. They won't send you to hell, because hell is in your own mind. You're responsible for these things and the reactions that come from them, but you also can be a lamp unto yourself and destroy them to a great extent, and live a life which is beneficial to yourselves and to all their beings, as we say. So, and in fact, if you want to put it in music, because there's a higher way of looking at this, and the great souls like Sri Ram would tell you this, he would sing something like Tava Namasada Shuva Sadakahe Patita Dhammamanava Pavakahe Mahima Tavagochara Shuddha Bane Gurudeva Daya Karadina Jane Jaya Sadguru Ishvara Prabhakahe Bhavaroga Vinakara Vinashakahe Manayena Rahitava Sri Charane Gurudeva Daya Karadina Jane. So one of Sri Ramakrishna's fine devotees, Devendranath Mazumdar, wrote these 8 verses. Sri Guru Stavashtaka, he called this stotram. He says here, O Lord, thy holy name uplifts and brings enlightenment to all beings. Thy name even purifies the lowly and the fallen ones. But thy glories are revealed only to those with pure minds. O divine teacher, kindly bestow compassion to thy humble devotee. So, the Divine Mother of the Universe, the Guru, who is her emissary, will bestow about these teachings that will bring enlightenment upon you, and you can get enlightenment. But these secret things that she has to communicate to the soul, the highest visions, are only communicated to those with pure minds. So this is the difference between a kind of general enlightenment, or salvation you might call it, and beings who are vouchsafed these beautiful visions by Divine Mother and by her emissaries. Very well put by Devendranath Mazumdar. And he continues on, victory to thee, O illumined teacher, who is the leader of our souls, the one who destroys the effects of the disease of worldliness. May my mind remain steadily fixed on thy holy feet of sanctuary. O teacher divine, kindly shower compassion on thy humble devotee. Jaya Sadguru, yes, Jaya to the world teacher who removes these problems in our existence, which will cause knots, and we'll look about that after the break. Let's look over here further at Sri Ram's teachings and take a second chart. I had made up my mind that we would go through some of these charts at a good pace, but here you see Sri Ramachandra's discourse of divine discontent. That's a phrase coined by myself when I read Lord Vashishta's yoga, called Vashishta's Yoga, and I made a new English translation of that a decade or more ago. And I put a lot of these teachings from the different prakarnas, sections of because the Laghu Yoga Vashishta is voluminous, but the Briha Yoga Vashishta has never been put into a language, English language, because it's too many pages. So I took the Laghu Yoga Vashishta and made a quintessential Yoga Vashishta out of it by boiling it down into my favorite stories that are pertinent to this day and age of those 4 prakarnas that are there. Prakarna means a chapter. So there's a lot of beautiful stories in there, and the whole thing is under the auspice of Lord Vashishta telling Sri Ram when he was just a teenager about the problem of Maya in the mind. So you see this first quote that King Janaka said to Sukadev, "There is one thing that thou hast yet to do." So Sukadev is a young man. His father's Vedavyas, father of Vedanta. So Sukadev, is this young man who's just poised for enlightenment again. Probably has gotten enlightenment before, but he can't get it from Vedavyas because it's his father. So this is a problem there, a little subtle problem between father-son, that he can't get enlightenment from his father. So his father knows this and sends him to King Janaka. So it's back on earth. So he has to take on a body on earth, this is Sukadev, and go to Janaka and learn these teachings. So he finds out that there's one problem he's laboring. It's the exact same problem that Sri Ramachandra as a teenager had when he went on pilgrimage and came back despondent, and that Lord Vashishta now has to remove from his mind. Deftly has to do that. And that's this. There's one thing you have to do. Give up delusion of Maya that has arisen in your mind. So no matter how much enlightenment he's gotten and how much dharmic knowledge he's gathered, he's still got this one little belief, if you want to call it that, in the existence of Maya still plaguing his mind. He hasn't become transparent yet. He's got that persisting in his thinking. And for these souls, it falls around what? Pervasive human suffering and the compassion that's needed. So most people don't have compassion for the suffering of others. So these people, these beings have a compassion for others, and that can be a problem. Because by having compassion for people's suffering, you're admitting that their suffering is real, and suffering is not real. Evil also, not real. In fact, the whole world in which evil and suffering occur is not real, you see. So all of this, is a thicket of clinging vines, as the Zen Buddhist would put it. And it's easy to fall into it, and it's difficult to extract yourself out of it. And if you do extract yourself out of it, there's a tendril or two that follows you. And the tendril in this case, with Sukadeva and with Sri Ram as a teenager, was that Sri Ram went on pilgrimage like Buddha did, left the palace and so forth. And when he came back, he was a different lad. He was the sun of everyone's day. He was the apple of everyone's eye before he left. When he came back, he's all despondent, quiet, sober, and he won't speak to anyone, not even his father, the king. So, basically, King Dasaratha gets his chief priest and says, sick him. Six King Dasaratha, six Lord Vashishta upon the young Sri Ram. And so to make a long story short, please read it yourself in Yoga Vashishta, that beautiful scripture, that here's King Dasaratha's court, or at least an image of it that I found. And basically, here is what happened when they finally got Ram to come to court after his pilgrimage and tell him what was bothering him. So King Dasaratha's court is filled with dozens, maybe even 50 or 100 people every night, and they discuss Dharma till sunrise. This is what they did back in that time. They just sat and they just talked about God and Dharma and teachings until they lost track of time. They'd sit at sunset, and then all of a sudden they look out the window, hey, the sun's rising. So all their whole night had gone past. They hadn't even experienced the passage of time, and they just talked about God the whole time. I would like to see that happen in this world again, in this yuga. And there are probably some factions that are involved in that. Being able to sit with your wife or your children or your guru or your friends and immediately sit down and start talking about dharmic things and important things is what we want to see. Satsang, basically, it's called. Do a little arti, a little satsang, make that a regular thing every day, and pretty soon you'll have things to talk about. And it might be connected to some of these problems that you're experiencing. And it might then help transform them so that you can transcend them, so that you can become transparent. So it's all leading up to these third, fourth, and fifth T's, as you'll see over the next several weeks. So that is sort of a preface to the story. So when King Dasaratha finally gets Lord Vashishta to go and convince Sri Ram to come to the court that night, all of a sudden he enters the court, and there Lord Vashishta sets him up and asks him that question. What's the problem? And this chart is based upon that. You know me, I don't like to spend a lot of time with verbal transmission, reading a lot. So I'm just going to select something out of each one of these categories. But you can see here how Sri Ram, as great soul, breaks it down. He's got problems with these things. When he finally speaks out, he says, the young Sri Ram had become despondent, incommunicable, and wholly disinterested in either company or conversation, and the decorum and discourse that is required for it. All noticed this major and marked change in the previously charming and irrepressible lad,
but no one could succeed in extracting from him the cause of the lamentable condition that had suddenly swept over him, like dark rain clouds gathering ominously over a pensive and brooding sea. So the sea of his consciousness had some dark clouds gathering over it by going on pilgrimage and seeing other people suffer so much out in the world. So then they get him to court and they ask him, what's wrong with you? What's this change that's come over you? And he says, though my birth was auspicious, born as I was into the great solar line in the house of King Dasaratha, my father, and raised up with an end to inform me of all the facets of knowledge available, yet I find that there is no lasting happiness in this knowledge, and none certainly in the world itself. As I gaze out upon the world, I see beyond all the subtle obscurations, clever imputations, and deceitful pretenses, and hypocrisy to a state that transcends these rounds of birth and death that all beings are so adamantly engaged in. All the many objects and sense enjoyments possible in this world, all possessions and all relationships, all of the various occupations and the hosts of sensations that they bring, when I systematically begin to analyze them at true face value, I found that I had lost all love for them. The water of false promise, appearing in the mirage of delusion that hangs suspended above the desert of this transitory world, now being known by me for what it really is, all unreal, has ceased to attract me anymore. So this young lad is telling the whole congregation this, at the behest of Lord Vasishta's question. So what specifically then is troubling you? So here you see it. On the column, far left, false superimposition is troubling me. That Brahman is hidden behind Maya. Rude ignorance is troubling me. False identification with things unreal. Abhimana is troubling me. Prana, life force, is troubling me. Ahamkara, the ego, troubling me. Manas, the dual mind, troubling me. Deha, the body. Jayate, infancy. Vardate, youth. Kama, lust. Apakshyate, old age. Kala, time. Maya Shakti, illusion. And wealth and mental impressions, samskaras, all these are bothering me. So in this order, he says, wealth. As I look out upon the world around me, upon the occupations of friends and families, upon beings of high and low birth alike, I see that all are seeking to be happy via the pursuit and accumulation of wealth. But wealth does not confer happiness and even throws up barriers to the attainment of peace that is so crucial for a steady spiritual life and realization. So he reads the riot act about wealth. Then, life force. I'm going through this list randomly. Another problem in Maya that has struck me and sobered me is the presence of desire and its connection with prana and disease. It is like a diamond-pointed sword that penetrates everything in life and mind. Ahamkara, ego. Even one's acts, although if they be good, one's thoughts righteous, and one's ritual well-intentioned, still, if these be associated with the baneful ego at all, they will end up in nothing that is truly beneficial. So the immature ego gets a hold of things, then they all turn sour. Then, manas, one on the list, manas, mind. This mundane and ordinary mind, if left unpurified by spiritual practices, behaves like a homeless mongrel, wandering here and there, looking for table scraps tossed out the door by humble villagers. On the other hand, if any bliss of higher things does come to it, this poor mind fails to hold on to it for its own good, like a straw basket which fails to contain water. All worlds, all objects come from this mind. So he's learned the mind-only school's secret. Desire, he says, verily I liken desire to a tribe of migrating monkeys, who never come to rest for any reason, in any place, for any given length of time. Restless, that is the very nature of this mind. He talks about the human body. It is a house built in Maya that is intricate, constructed upon the foundation of ignorance, and built utilizing the wooden planks and panels of fear and vanity. Its tenant is Ahamkara, the ego, who is like a worldly householder possessed of 10 troublesome cows, called the 10 senses. He employs a servant called Manas, the dual mind, engaged in mental projection for the sake of mere enjoyment, and his wife is named Desire. She lives with him within these fleshy walls. This house is the human body, which, despite its tendency to rot and fall ill, is coveted by everyone who inhabits the realm of Maya. Infancy, he says, and remember, he's talking to the entire court here. King Dasaratha is there, Lord Vashishta is there, and all the priests are there. Vishvamitra, the great sage, is there, because he's come to ask the king to help to give him his son so he can go destroy demons in the forest with, because his son can do it, Ram, that is. And all the villagers are there, the merchants, the worker class, anyone who wants to come to King Dasaratha's court is there to listen. And so Sri Ram is talking to them about all these things. You want to know what's bothering me? Here they are. Youth is next. The desires in the mind around emotional love surface like a raging tempest, and the young soul is caught like a deer in a trap by the sensual music of attachment to the opposite sex. Lust. We see how easily impulsive actions rise up suddenly, driven by lust and greed-based anger and jealousy, and leading to trespasses on dharmic law, like stealing, cheating, lying, violence, and indulgence in various vice-filled pastimes. These ignorant actions resemble the despicable roamings of village curs, who sniff around the rubbish heaps lying about the town in search of unsavory edibles, discarded or passed over by even the poorest of wretches. Old age and dotage. At that stage of life, the intelligence of a worldly man, if he had any to begin with, abandons him, and he begins to talk nonsense. His family, friends, relatives, and others either revile his company at that time or laugh at him behind his back, or both. The problem of worldly people with senile and simple minds now all of a sudden have nothing profound to say at all. Then Kala, time, he had a problem with time. He says, like huge oceans being evaporated into clouds by steam, clouds of steam by the close orbit of a flaming sun, so too does time quench all things, all objects, all worlds, and all beings. Shakti power, he has a problem with that. She wears for her own sportive pleasure. She moves about the worlds in subtle, then terrible fashion, sometimes riding a gentle peacock, other times beaming forth suddenly and terribly through the eyes of Rudra, the fear-inspiring Shiva. How awesome she is and how unpredictable. But beings do not see her or know her. Their minds, then fallen into illusion of projected worlds and unreal objects, become confused and heavily afflicted with cares and worries about this mutable world, which is how we started out talking about why you should consciously take up the problems of the world and meditate upon them. They do not look with awake and sobered vision upon the series of lifetimes they are involved in previously, nor do they know the real purpose of birth and they are presently experiencing. So both the past lifetimes and the lifetime they're living are unconscious. Thus it is that when an opportunity to exercise valuable spiritual qualities inherent in the mind becomes possible, beings fail to take advantage of it and instead engage carelessly in mundane thoughts and activities. this rare chance for enlightenment, the real purpose for Shakti, is thus squandered, put off indefinitely, and who knows when such a great boon will become available again in this or any other life. So this is how he goes on. I'm not going to read selections of every one of these in the category. You can look at them yourself. But suffice to say that he reads the Riot Act, and that's why we're calling it here the Discourse of Divine Discontent. Before the break, let's look here. About false superimposition, his complaint is it covers the real with the unreal. The analogy he uses is blue in sky, mirage in a desert. Sri Ramakrishna liked that too. He said, the sky and the ocean both look blue from a distance, but when you go up close to them, you see they're colorless. So Maya is like that, makes things look other than what they are. The solution for that, false superimposition, he says, this world manifests itself in Brahman. So the shift is in the mind. You're looking at it as a world with a problem that has passions and fetters, and they're all real. But if you shifted your mind to the fact that the world was not only exists in the mind, and the mind has manifests itself in Brahman, then you all of a sudden create a solution for a problem that otherwise is plaguing everyone all the time. Root ignorance. He says, what's the complaint? It's the source of misery and suffering. In other words, if people knew their Atman, misery and suffering would be attenuated greatly. The analogy he uses is like a stone stuck in one's throat. Or sometimes he uses a cherry pit. In the Yoga Vishishta he says, all of this is like a cherry pit that's stuck in my throat. You know, it's dangerous. Could go down the wrong windpipe and kill me, or I could cough it up, you never know, or I could swallow it. So, like a cherry pit stuck in the throat is how he says about root ignorance. And the solution to it, an illumined teacher and holy company. Guru and Sangha is the solution for root ignorance. Those beings will tell you about your true nature. Root ignorance will disappear and you'll be free. You'll certainly be on your way to freedom. What about desires? He says the complaint is they breed attachment, which then breeds rebirth. The analogy is like a diamond-pointed sword. You heard me read that. This desire is like a diamond-pointed sword that penetrates everything. Solution? Cultivate viveka and vairagya. Cultivate viveka and vairagya. How about false identification, ahabhimana? The complaint is that it causes forgetfulness of the self. You identify with everything else, and then you forget yourself. The analogy, like clouds that obscure the sun. Solution, meditate on Atman within the heart. That will disperse the clouds of ignorance and false identification. Next one is prana, life force. His complaint about it, it's impermanent and ends in death. The analogy, a drop of water falling off a leaf. Precarious, like that, the prana. You could be well one day and sick the next. You could be living one day and dead the next. You could see one day and be blind the next. It's all the prana. And what's the solution? Spend it engaged in Atmic inquiry. Atmic inquiry. Atma is meditation and inquiry about the nature of the Atman. Atma vichara, they call that. How about ego? Complaint, root of worry and the womb of karma. In the analogy, rain for flowers of desire. The solution, flat out, renunciation. Renounce it. That's one way most people don't go. They're just, they're not strong enough or forthright right enough just to, I renounce that right now, I give it up, it's not good for me. They'll usually entertain things that aren't good for them. Manas, the mind, the dual mind, he complains about it that it's the root of duality and the cause of objects. So he knows as a young man that the world of objects has been created by the mind, not by God. It's all the mind's doing. And his analogy, it's like a wicker basket unable to hold water. I'm going to the well with my wicker basket. I'll bring you back some water, Mother. No, I don't think so. Not with this dual mind. And his solution for it, use it to serve others and live a divine life. That's how to use the body, deha. Jayate, infancy, he says, complaint, state of helplessness and terror. Analogy, invites the moon to come near it. So it's like the song about baby Uma. She thought she could grasp the moon. Her father has to tell her, you can't grasp the moon. Moon and earth can never meet. And so she cries, she doesn't like that. So he shows her, he takes a mirror and shows her own face and says, here, look at this moon on earth. And she sees her own face and goes into samadhi, sleep of samadhi. So asking the moon to come near is a fool's game. See, it's not going to happen. So this is how he describes infancy. The solution, transcend the need for rebirth. It's also the solution for disease, by the way. Transcend the need for rebirth. Make sure that you're a free soul. Vardhate is youth, as we said over here. Complaint, it's dominated by the god of love. That's Kama, again. Or Cupid, if you want to put it that way. And the problem is it's like a deer falling quickly into a pit, or falling giddily into a pit. It's giddy means it's dizzy and so forth. The solution for it, spend it acquiring sterling virtues. If you can be a youth that can acquire sterling virtues, then you pretty much sidetrack, you put off all of these problems karmas that will come from getting involved with other souls who, like you, are not illumined yet, not even necessarily found their path yet. So you be very careful about your actions in youth. Develop these sterling qualities. Then lust. His complaint puts body and mind in bondage. His metaphor, like dry fuel, it burns one in hell. And the solution, renunciation based on proper analysis. So you analyze the problem of lust, like I was saying, meditate upon these things. Don't just pretend them away or suffer them without any help in sight. You meditate upon them and understand them, connect them, and then you can work with them and destroy them. How about old age? He says it renders one helpless and senile. The analogy says it's a march of the armies of disease. So people in old age will experience the march of the armies of disease. They'll just come out of nowhere, like ants out of the woodwork. And all of a sudden one problem and then the next. And people trying to deal with that today in the medical community will give you a pill for one thing and that'll cause something else to come up. And so it's this march of the army of diseases, and you're trying to stifle them, their approach. As the hut of the body in Maya falls apart, as he explained so nicely to us while we were reading the Yoga Vashishta. All of these teachings basically are pretty much extracted from Lord Vashishta's yoga. I put them in one chart so you can see what a great soul, if he got on a rag, was talking about, and why he's renounced the world. There's many reasons, not just to get enlightenment,
But because of the nature of the world itself, and the nature of mind, and the nature of the 6 passions, and the 8 fetters, and all of that, there's a more incentive to seek for freedom. Kala, time, it devours all things, is his complaint. The analogy, it's like a serpent in an eagle's grasp. And the solution, engage in sadhana and meditation. So that's the best way to spend your time. Do your spiritual practice and meditate. Read the scriptures under the guidance of a guru in the holy company. All these things are called like the triple gem, Guru, Dharma, Sangha. And it creates an atmosphere that helps you to grow. And it's also an atmosphere that if these things rise in you, that atmosphere, the light that comes from it, will destroy them. If these things arise without Guru, Dharma, and Sangha, then they cause karma. You complain about them, you brood, you suffer, and they go away and you think everything's okay, but then they come back again. This is a constant round of things based on ignorance and false identification. So this is all connected. The remaining few minutes we'll just have time to finish this. He complains about the Maya Shakti. The power of illusion really is what he's talking about, not Divine Mother. It creates and destroys the 3 worlds. The analogy is that it's like a tigress in a forest of delusion. It's hunting the soul, as it were, and devouring it. And the solution, propitiate the Divine Mother. Maya Shakti is usually connected with her. She's Mahamaya. So if you propitiate the Divine Mother of the universe, then you can see through the Maya. She'll help you see through it. And she'll be your guide. May she, the primal guide, my refuge be. That's a quote from Swami Vivekananda in one of his poems. May she, the primal guide, my refuge be. So he's looking into, as long as he's in this world and he's in a form, even though he only lived in it 39 years, and he has to deal with the Western materialism and ignorance when he came here, and the problems of his native India before he left. He's got all these things, and he's got hundreds and thousands of souls, and he's the Nitya Siddha, the perfect soul, and the devoted devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, or Ramachandra if you want. And so even in spite of, or despite of, all those things, then he's taking his refuge in Divine Mother. She's my especial thing, he said. So may she, the primal guide, my refuge be. Beautiful saying. I like that. Penultimately there is wealth. Remember he said, it restricts true happiness and bliss. It was interesting that he remarked about it, that people engaged in commerce, forgot their true nature and they forgot their past lifetime. And so that teaching was there before Father of Yoga, Patanjali, got a hold of it. That is, by engaging in too much worldly commerce, making money, wealth, job, preoccupation with the world, attachment to the world, the objects you get from the money that you get from the job. It's all this stuff is connected in this one tirade he's giving, this truth tirade, or non-truth tirade, if you want to put it that way. A tirade about all the things that are unreal, but that people are considering real. So you can see how they're all connected, and wealth would be at the root of them, as Timothy said, Christ's apostle. So he says here that the analogy that he uses, like a ruby coated with dust. Wealth, like a ruby coated with dust. And the solution, use it to support spirituality and a dharmic family. Remember he said, the first thing I read in Yoga Vasishtha today in this first half was that even though I was born in the solar line with King Dasaratha, one of the Manus, in a family of dharmic people with higher leanings. Even though that's true, I've gone outside the palace and I've seen how they live out there. So he's contrasting this beautiful life he had amidst more conscious people
with the less unfortunate lives of people who are imbued with karma, negative karmas. So he's like Lord Buddha some 1500 or 2000 years later, who left the palace and saw the four signs. Many of them were like this, aging and disease and so forth. He's just like that, and he's seen that, and now he cannot live happily in the palace anymore. He too goes away, and under different circumstances than Lord Buddha did, but still goes away and has his experiences and challenges in the world. The final thing here is samskaras. He complains about them, mental impressions that have been formed, like cutting yourself again and again, a scar tissue of the mind, if you will. He says, by way of complaint, perpetuates cycles of existence. Of course, you'd go all the way back to the top then and say, in ignorance. You see, it perpetuates cycles of existence in ignorance. His analogy, like many sparks rising from a fire. That's these mental impressions. Or again, ants coming out of the woodwork in one song in India. Solution, he says, spiritual practice and self-effort will get rid of your mental impressions. So you can't be held helpless, but you will be held accountable if you don't take these to task. And so the whole first half, as difficult as it is to teach and also to listen to, has been explained by way of Vedanta and early teachings of the Avatar, Sri Ram, their experiences with these very same things, how they would notice them, how they would treat them. That is, it's not just a complaint. There are analogies, and there's also solutions. And so the Vedanta, as always, gives out these great teachings for people who have or are troubled by any of these things, because most good people might just, I say, have maybe one or two that is more like a big bubble with little bubbles around it, Ramakrishna used to say. And get to that big bubble and pop it, then the others will be dispersed. And that way, karmas, samskaras, and the things that he's complaining about here can be dissolved, and one can live a life, a dharmic life, even a divine life, or no life at all, a transparent life. We'll be getting to that in the classes to come. So after the break then, we'll look more at some teachings on transgression and move into that second T about transmigration. So let's take our 15-minute break here. Thank you for your kind attentions.
are back for the second half of the first class on the 5 T's, or 5 trans, and we've been concentrating mostly on the first one, which is transgressions. We've shown how the difference between transgression in Vedanta and, say, sin in or immorality in other religions has been noted. And a lot of that, of course, is going to help if you know that you're responsible for the karma that you reap what you sow, and so forth. And that it all has come from the mind, not from the soul. Those two things are very key, so that you separate the wheat from the chaff, or do your spiritual discrimination, viveka vairagya, we call it in Vedanta. And those things are like axioms that you adopt first, like the mind-only school. Then you're escaping all this other problem that comes from dogmas or creeds or ideologies that are not mature yet in those levels, and they're still based in considering the world to be real. The problem with knowing the world to be unreal is that you lose a lot of support and a lot of votaries from people who are desire-based politics and professions and societies and races and cultures. Even back in Sri Ram's time, we're based in wealth and enjoyment and so forth. And probably in the earlier times you could enjoy those things without so many negative effects. It's not the case now in the Kali Yuga. So many negative effects are coming from repeated acts done under the mantle or under the umbrella that objects are real, the pleasure I get for them is beneficial. The purpose of life is to get wealthy, to be famous, to have power over others. These are insidious powers, and they exacerbate in later ages. Religion too falls horribly in a time like this and doesn't do its job anymore. So on all sides, it's like Sri Ram said, and we had this 2 weeks ago when we were almost setting ourselves up for this series of class, when we said, the house of Maya will become tumbling down around the ears of all and sundry. I can quote it exactly. This house of Maya will come tumbling down around the ears of all and sundry. So everyone is experiencing this, the sky is falling, Chicken Little kind of problem, philosophically speaking, mentally speaking, psychologically speaking, and right on down to physically speaking. We can see it falling apart around us. So that's where teachings like this need a review, and they're not pessimism, and they're not, as I said before the end of the break, they're difficult to teach in a setting that really is set up to be more dharmic, so that you should be hearing positive teachings and all this. But we're trying to take a negative teaching, like Sri Ramakrishna did, and give it a positive turn. Like when he saw people in India drinking a lot and carousing on the streets and so forth, he'd just go by in a carriage and say, he would get out sometimes and dance with the drunkards, because he was drunk, but he was drunk with divine intoxication and they were drunk with ordinary wine. And the songs were written later about the master doing that by people who didn't even mention Sri Ramakrishna in the song all the time, but this kind of intoxication that people should be going for. And Sri Ramakrishna has already read the Riot Act on that bliss and happiness cannot happen with this ego in charge. So that's why we meditate on the distinctions. And I've put up a couple more charts here, that, especially one that we just want to wrap up, basically the Riot Act that we've been reading, courtesy of Lord Vashishta and Sri Ram's relationship. This guru disciple were superlative back in this earlier yuga. An avatar in his teenage years, before he's fully aware of his avatarhood, plus his fully enlightened seer, who is only one of only 12 rishis living at the time who knew that Sri Ram was an avatar. Vishvamitra, Vashishta, 10 others knew that this young man was not just the perfect son of King Dasaratha, born in the solar line. He was an avatar born again. And if you read the Ramayana, you won't get that so much. But if you read the Adhyatma Ramayana, the non-dual version, the slimmed down version of the Ramayana, you'll get that fully. Oh,
don't look at Sri Ram as just the perfect son of King Dasarata. This is an avatar come to earth again in the body. Don't be put off by the fact or deceived by the fact that simply because he's aware of these imperfections that he has them. Because as we were talking about the break here, the difference between most people who say monks and so forth, who see the world as a fearful place, like a hole in the ground, is that they're going to go run away from it and renounce it. That's a transcendent type of soul, but a transparent kind of soul is a soul who has no regard for the world whatsoever, no regard for the ego whatsoever. What does he have regard for? That people have fallen into suffering, and they've forgotten their Atman. So they are born in the body already knowing the world is unreal. Most of us can't make that claim when we grow up. It came to us later, if it came to us at all, that the world was unreal, projected by the mind, and the mind being a realm of thought and prana and so forth. We had to find that out later. But these souls that came, they already have renounced the world in many lifetimes. Like Krishna saying, I have no place here. I don't come back for desire. I come back just for the highest good of living beings. And Christ too, you don't lay your birds have nests, foxes have holes, but you have no place to lay your head here. I mean, they already know this when they're born, and then when they come amongst us, they're not ruining deforestation or pollution of oceans or whatever. What they're ruining is that you've fallen into forgetfulness of your Atman, because forests and oceans can come back forever. Prakriti has that in droves. You can't pollute Prakriti. It's a high ideation in the cosmic mind. Pure worlds can be sort of a contradiction in terms, but pure worlds can be created again and again from the cosmic mind in cycles. This is the advantage of knowing that time comes in cycles and everything returns and comes and returns. Lord Buddha's teaching, like the river. But so they come back knowing that all of this is this constant change, constant cycles, unreal, illusory, whatever you want to call it. What they're there for is to help you understand what they understand about it and give it up. Because if you give it up, you can transcend the body and become transparent like them, or you can become free and come back again like them and help others. In the most facile and complete way you can do this. So looking into negative teachings like this was one of the main facets of Sri Ramakrishna's descent in the 1800s, like being drunk. Oh yes, I'll get out and dance with you. Let's grab hands and dance around together. You're drunk on ordinary wine, I'm drunk on bliss, but maybe I can convince you to be drunk with me. Give up your bad habits, your drinking, your lust, your attachment, your desire, the anger that comes when you drink. Because when he had bliss, he didn't get angry. But when you had intoxication and happiness from liquor, you got angry. So he wants to convince you of all of this, and in order to do that, he wants to, like Sri Ramakrishna in another life with Sri Ramchandra, he wants to read you the Riot Act. And so we looked at that. Now there's one more chart I want to show you that has some more of these teachings. They're called the 3 enemies of reason, the 3 stupefactions, and the 4 deadly traps. There you see the demons there looking down. And so this adds up to actually 3, 6, 10, and there's actually 10 heads here, so I kind of liked it. So there's these 10 demons, as it were, looking down on human beings, which is this shot of Earth from space. And we have these teachings that we can go through quite quickly because they go along with the 6 transformations, the 6 passions, the 8 fetters, and the 6 billows. And there are others I could show you, the 9 antaryayas of yoga and the 5 kleshas of Lord Patanjali. So all of these souls in India, and souls in other religions too that are aware and conscious, have brought these out as things to be careful of and to watch for. Transforming poison to nectar is a great art. And so quite often the seers will be much more impressed with a person who starts out with a heavy burden and casts it off than a person who starts out with not much burden and casts it off. They think it's a marvelous thing to see, if you want to put it this way, a sinner turn into a saint. There's the marvel for you right there. If there's any miracle, it's that. So the greatest miracle is the transformation of the human soul. And we'll talk about transformation as we get into it. But so these other collections here are very interesting. The three enemies of reason, because in Vedanta we hold reason to be penultimate importance. Direct spiritual experience transcends reason, but you have to have reason in order to get direct spiritual experience. So the three things that would plague you in the realm of reason, that would be to deter you from being reasonable, are garva, amarsha, and asuya. That is egotism, intolerance, and narrowness. Those are the best words I could find in English to put to those three Sanskrit terms. So garva, egotism, is pretty much obvious. If the ego is in control of things, then you're a danger to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a good person, because bad people, bad egos have done good things to people, even sometimes unconsciously. Some horrible thing they did turned into something wonderful. And then good people have done some great things for people, and they've turned horrible. So this is the realm of karma, which is why we have to declare there's no God here in the universe except karma. In the physical universe, karma is the God. If you're looking for Brahman or God here, you're looking in all the wrong places. When you departed yourself from divine reality, which is called formless, and took on a form, you entered Maya, and you left divine reality behind. And now it's going to be a very deep search you're going to have to engage in, a vigil you're going to have to remain on in order to find Brahman as the foundation of all this. When you find divine reality is at the foundation of all this, your mind is so high that you don't see this anymore. I don't think I could say it any better than that. When you start to look for Brahman, you forget the world. And if the world is still present and that person is still looking for Brahman, they're conflicted, they're confused. And they suffer as much as a worldly person who's not looking for God. They might even suffer more, Sri Ramakrishna said. So, you're trying to pose impossible things because you've lost your reason about it. So egotism will help you very nicely, thank you, lose your reason. And your reason, what is it? Atman alone abides. The ego is a bubble. The ego is an onion with many layers and no center, Sri Ramakrishna said. So you keep peeling an onion, right? Where's the center? There's no substance to it, and it makes you cry while you're trying to peel it. So give up the ego, and instead give up the little self and go to the big self, the great self. There's no God here, Sri Ramakrishna said. Swami Vivekananda said, but there is the great self. So in that way you can see this in people. Narayan, that's a beautiful name in Sanskrit. It means God as mankind. Nara, man. So he was named Narendra, Swami Vivekananda, by his parents. So this is God walking around on two legs, as he was later to say. And all of us are that, but we're angels unaware. That's how he put it. He wrote a poem, a song called Angels Unaware. So if you look into his beautiful poems, what's it called? Search for God. There's a little book of all of the songs he wrote. He didn't write books, although there are many books that are attributed to him. Means that he spoke and they wrote it down. And so they're like living books. Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and inspired talks. All those things came from people writing down what he said. Stenographers and people who knew their business and shorthand and so forth got everything he said, and those were turned into books later. So what he did write, though, was these songs and these poems. They were very beautiful. I quoted a few of the lines in the first half today, and there it is again. This beautiful idea of God walking around on two legs. So the ego will get in the way of that. It'll keep that from being seen by both the observer and the self. the self will not see itself with the ego in the way. You know, if this room were empty, which is not, it's got all these beautiful images in it and flowers in front of it and candles and incense, because we had a beautiful puja here last night, and one of our brahmacharis did the full puja by memory. So we've got the divine atmosphere all installed here, but if it were empty and we blew up a balloon inside of it, that's how I've been describing the unripe ego. We're all outside, and though the room's empty, we can't get in. It's because there's a membrane. It's like a block or a granthi in front of your getting into it. So that's how the ego is empty, or like an onion, all peelings and no center. It makes you cry and weep and impassable. You can't get to your true self. So some things about garva or egotism. People act in the ego and cause all sorts of karma. So just the word itself, if you look into it, is a teaching on its own. It makes you want to draw back and become selfless instead of selfish. Amarsha, intolerance, one of the big problems. And tolerance isn't much better, Gandhi said. I remember it says, so from tolerance to intolerance, great. But what you really want to go is to higher understanding. Beyond tolerance is acceptance of other religions. And he used to say, I'll go into the Christian church and pray in front of the cross. I'll go into the Muslim tekka and I'll circumambulate. I'll go into the Jewish synagogue and I'll worship there, and I'll also go into the Hindu temple and worship Krishna. He says, I'm not a Hindu really in that way. I've got this wide open perspective that's beyond tolerance, and it's into acceptance of all other religions. Not just tolerance, because that doesn't have a very high connotation in our tradition. But intolerance, of course, is a great, what is it here, enemy. It's a great enemy to your progress. And it really is very much connected with the next one, asuya, narrowness. That's a real, well, let's go back to the first half, it's a sin. If there's some things that I wouldn't even have a problem labeling sin, and one of those would be this narrowness, because it rails against what? Universality, the truth of universality. Universality is a principle whose time has come, and it's come through the doorway of Sri Ramakrishna, who has brought it in this age. His openness to all the religions of the world was far beyond Gandhi's, for instance, because he wasn't just even tolerant or higher understanding. He was actually practicing other religions and realizing that other religions were true, that Jesus was true, that Moses was true, and Muhammad and so forth. And these were parts of his own spiritual experience. So he was this paragon of universal harmony. What is the worst thing that would impede that? Like a dam in front of a river would be this narrowness of vision. So you must have expansive vision. May our minds expand in their capacity to know Brahman. You know how we sing that, right? Om apyantu mamangani vak pranaschakshu shrotra matra balamindriyani cha sarvani sarvam brahma upanishadam mahabrahma nirakuryam mama brahma nirakaroda nirakaranamastva nirakaranam mayastu taratmani nirateya upanu shatsu dharmaste maishantu te maishantu. So you saw that Sri Ram had a problem with prana in the first half. So what is, may our bodies, he had a problem with the body. May our bodies what then? Experience great health. May our life force what?
Flow unimpeded.
Flow unimpeded. May our minds expand in their capacity to know Brahman. And so, because all existence is Brahman, say the Upanishads. So this is the absolute antithesis and opposite of egotism, intolerance, and narrowness. This is universal teaching. This is Sanatana Dharma. They don't toy around with problems. And if they do toy around with problems, it's to help you see them and transcend them, not to call you a sinner or label you. not to force you into accepting a savior that you have never even met or don't even know anything about. Save yourself, be a lamp unto yourself. That's always been the great statement of India, even before Lord Buddha said it. Sadhana, spiritual practice, will help you free yourself. You can join the company of the saints and seers then and dance with them. Holy company. So that's going to impinge upon you, see, to make that happen for yourself. Because all knowledge lies within you, so do all problems lie within the mind. So you better go into that you and M. You know, the A, this word is A, your next world is you, and then the world beyond that is M, Om, A-U-M. So you better connect those three mantras of Om and perfect yourself in each one of them and transcend each one of them to get into a state of transparency. We'll look at that in about 2 weeks. In the meantime, we're coursing along here. The next thing to take up is the 3 stupefactions, or the 3 dumb, stupid cuckoos, I like to call it sometimes. So the 3 stupefactions are Vyutana-chitta, Ajanataha, and Ahaituka. So Vyutana-chitta is worldliness. That's a great stupefaction. You can see the demon, the asura there coming out of the clouds, as it were, and just forcing its way as a doorway onto the earth scene, and causing people to live in such a way that forgets spirituality, forgets dharma, forgets intelligence, and even forgets reason, so that they just do unreasonable things for the sake of, should we go back to the chart, money, wealth, fame, and youth. So it reminds me of Shankara's great Bhaja Govindam when we sing that. See, when I was a baby, I was attached to my mother's breast. When I was a young boy, I was attached to sport. When I was a young man, I was attached to a young woman. When I was old, I was attached to anxiety. Why? Because the 6 transformations are coming: growth, disease, old age, decay. But alas, to the Supreme Brahman, I was never attached. So through that whole life, I lived in a state of worldliness and didn't even wake up at the time of their death, probably. So what do you expect? That they will come back in another cycle of existence the same way they were before? Maybe Mahashakti will give them a few advantages to help raise themselves up by their own bootstraps, but will they take them? Will they transform themselves? Will they transition into a higher cycle of existence? These are questions which all this brings up. Ajanataha is insensitivity. It's nice to put that with intolerance and narrowness. If you put these 3 stupefactions next to the 3 enemies of reason, because the opposite of insensitivity is what you just saw in Sri Ram when he was reading the riot act on all those problems in relativity to the king and his court. Everyone listened. I was telling all the students here today in attendance to this class that after he read this riot act, the discourse of divine discontent, I like to call it, that there was stunned silence after that discourse, and then flowers started falling out of the ether inside the castle wall. Flowers started falling on the whole congregation, and then the siddhas and the munis came out of that ether into our ether and took bodies. So it was an amazing phenomena, probably unheralded in any religion at any time, as that scene that happened after the avatar of the Dvapara Yuga read the riot act of the divine discourse of discontent to that assembly, and it penetrated into another world and caused the munis and the siddhas to be ashamed to come out and take a body and thank Sri Ram for reminding them that not only was this world unreal, so was the next. Heaven, earth, and hell, they're all unreal. They're in the mind. And so a great soul will come and penetrate that curtain of Maya and help people see this. And Sri Ramakrishna has done that in this day and age, the Kali Yuga. Brought us all together. How many now? 5 or 6 million. In how long a time? Not much longer than 150 years. This great avatar has come and brought us, is bringing us together in the light of non-duality, and bringing back the Sanatana Dharma like the Ramakrishna order is doing in a way we haven't experienced at least since Shankara's day and time. And that was just in India. Now it's all of us are included. Even an American can get enlightenment. What a novel idea. We should try this, you see. So insensitivity would rail against that kind. Sensitivity, the opposite of it, if it's not an egotistic sensitivity around the wrong things like emotionalism or sensationalism, occult powers. People are very sensitive about these things, you see. Crystal balls and tarot cards and pets and that kind of stuff. But this kind of opposite of sensitivity I'm talking about is what Ram had when he had compassion for all souls. It made him speak this acid-like truth to a congregation of mixed souls like that. I mean, you had workers, you had merchants, you had the priest class there, you had warriors there, you had royalty there, and you had enlightened souls there. And here, this is what I have to say to you. So it's remarkable. So I advise everyone there are several translations, not just mine, of Yoga Vashishta. One by Ramakrishna Swami, Swami Bhaskarananda, one by a Swami of a different order that's Vishishta Yoga that is often referred to. But read that and maybe even look into the Ramayana to see, and the Atma Ramayana to see some of the facets of Sri Ram's appearance so long ago. I mean, we'd like to sing songs about him. So, like, if he were to sing something to us, he would say, Nama japane kyun chor diya Ram naam, japane kyun chor diya Rama. Nama japane kyun chor diya Krodana chora. Krodha was anger, right? Jyotana chora, Krodana chora, Jyotana chora, Sattavachane kyun chordiya Rama, Namajapane kyun chordiya Rama nam, Japane kyun chordiya Rama. Namajapane kyun chordiya. Beautiful songs, teachings of Sri Ram. Tell me, O mind, because everything has come out of you, why have you given up uttering the name of Ram, when you should be renouncing your anger and deceit, krodha and so forth? You have given up your integrity and sacrificed your love of truth instead. And about wealth, you flatter the millionaire. You forget to praise Sri Ram. Though Ram is the owner of the entire universe, what does the millionaire have? A presidency in a fast dissipating country called America? You're forgetting to praise the owner of the entire universe. In fact, all the three worlds, Sri Ram is the Lord of the worlds. There's other ways we sing about that too, when we talk about Ram as being the Lord of the worlds. Sarva Mangalam Koshalendraya Mahaniya Gunadaye Chakravarti Tanujaya Sarva Bhaumaya Mangalam Shri Sita Ramachandra 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 Shri Sita Ramachandra, Shri Sita Ramachandra, Shri Sita Ramachandra. Andara Rama, Vahira Rama, Jahadikata Rama, Hirama Rama Rama, Jagata Rama, Sovata Rama, Sapane Me Deko, Raja Rama Rama Rama. Beautiful bhajan there. Oh, friends, my eyes have been truly opened. Now, everywhere I look, I see nothing but Ram. Looking within, I see Ram. Outside, too, there's only Ram. In the waking state, I behold him clearly, and when sleeping, he visits my dreams. Now I see only Ram. So that's what I was saying earlier. When you see Brahman, or you see Ram, or you see the great reality, the world disappears. You don't see anything else. And in this day and age, we saw Sri Ramakrishna lose his consciousness of the world. Not only in samadhi when he was beyond the world, but even in everyday ordinary state, he was not cognizant of the world as a world separate from Ram or from Brahman. That's the key. He says, well, the world goes away how? Well, it transforms into Brahman. I see it as it really is. I'm not seeing the rope and the snake anymore. I'm, a snake and a rope anymore. I'm just seeing the rope. Seeing it as it really is. So there's two ways you can lose it. Transcendently, where the whole thing disappears, including your ego, or keeping the ripe ego and seeing it transform into what it truly is, Brahman in form. So the problem in there was your ignorance that he talked about. That's why he has a problem with root ignorance, because it's Maya and root ignorance are causing people to see it other than it is. And they don't have a chance to see it in samadhi. In most lifetimes, they're not going to have samadhi. They might have some lower samadhis, but most people aren't going to get higher samadhi. Sri Ramakrishna's wonderful 16 disciples, maybe only 2 or 3 maybe had higher samadhi, highest samadhi. So if you're not going to have a chance to see it in that transcendental way in your lifetime, then you better try and see it the way it's being expressed in the song. Now I see only Ram. I see only Brahman everywhere, because my ego got out of the way and I can finally see it as it truly is. So what I'm saying right now connects back to and makes sense of everything that Sri Ram said in that difficult chart we just undertook in the first half, to try to make sense out of all these negative propensities that are in people and the negativities that are in Maya, because they're all in the mind, and the mind is dual by nature. If you go beyond dual mind, this song makes sense. I see only Ram. So beautiful ways in which you can put it in music if you're sensitive to it. So now you have a haituka, jadedness. That's also a very good teaching nowadays. You have to say that, I would say that since religion admittedly has deteriorated, I'm not talking just about fundamentalism like the Christianity we were born in and so forth, because there are also higher turns of Christianity right now. But Hinduism, Buddhism, and so forth, there are some deteriorations going on in all religion where religion is not doing its job. And so if that's the case, you can't just pin all the blame upon people, but you can say that if they become jaded to the existence of God because of the problems in religion, then that's a problem. That's their problem. Somebody came to Sri Ramakrishna once and said, was complaining about God and religion. And Sri Ramakrishna said, it's not the fault of religion that all of these things are happening. The fault is basically in you, and it's also in God. And what? God has faults? And you say, in this way, you say that you're looking at the world and you're not seeing Brahman, you see, so it's been veiled from you. So you become jaded around it, you don't believe in it anymore. He says God put all the imperfections in religion. Because if you walk a path and it's easy, you don't build any muscles. So you hope your path has lots of boulders and trees to jump over and hills to climb and cliffs to clamber up so you can stay on the path. Then it builds your muscles and you become an accomplished walker of a path. If it's all easy for you, then no. So Sri Ramakrishna said, don't blame religion, blame God, because God put those difficulties in religion so that you could use the path to get yourself out of Maya. See? Strong enough. I mean, because that's why we say in some of these songs again, we will crush the stars to atoms. We will unhinge the universe. Don't you know who we are? We're the servants of Sri Ramakrishna. Those were Swami Vivekananda's words. So crush the stars to atom, unhinge the universe, take the universe off its hinges because it's in the way. And then you'll have that strength to see the reality that is your very self. It's not only behind everything, it's your very self you're seeing. God is just, mankind is just God walking around on two legs, so you have to remove the veils to see that. I was a teacher once I knew, wrote a book called You Are Not God. And so I woke up and said, that doesn't make very good sense to the Advaitas. We don't like your title. I said, why don't you put in parens until you realize you're God? Then we'll like it. You're not God until you realize you're God. That we can accept, you see, because people can't pretend this thing. So it was a good start, good premise, but it wasn't complete, didn't include everyone, you see. Non-dualists don't have any other ideal except I'm a Vedantist, everywhere I see only Brahman, and that's myself. That's how Vivekananda put it. You must understand, I'm a Vedantist, I see nothing but God everywhere, and that's myself I'm seeing. So jadedness will not allow that to happen. You'll fall into one of those stupefactions. Let me see here, because I've gone past it. Well, let's go ahead and finish it out, and then we'll read the quotes. So the next one is the 4 deadly traps. You can see a nice steel bear trap down there coming out of earth. And see the 4 deadly traps here. Udvega, Shoka, Vishada, and Vibranti. Shoka was one of those 8 fetters we had in the last half, so this repeats itself again. Udvega means guilt, great trap. Grief, a great trap. Depression, I don't think anyone will deny that. It's a great trap. And low self-esteem is a great trap. So the first one, Udvega, guilt. Of course, when we're talking in the vein of religion that calls you a sinner, when Swami Vivekananda came and said it's the greatest sin to call another a sinner, then you know what guilt is like. And when we give the non-dual teachings of Vedanta and the qualified non-dual teachings of yoga and the deification teachings of Tantra to people in the West from India, they get guilty, a lot of them. So that's they have a sense of guilt come about, and they won't be able to take to the path because of that. We've seen that happen quite a bit with people who come, and it is connected too with a sense of low self-esteem. These two could very much be a cause of one another. So you'll see people. If I say, well, yes, you can get initiation. You can take mantra diksha into this path, like you take hand with the Sufis and you take refuge with the Buddhists and so forth. You can take mantra diksha with the Vedanta, with India. And then the first thing I ask is, well, do I have to do a practice? I said, yes, that comes with it. And I said, well, I don't think I can do a practice. Is it very hard? So immediately they have guilt and low self-esteem about themselves. These traps are coming out already because they've had experience with themselves, with their egos before. They know they can't keep something up, and they know that if they fail, they'll get guilty about it, and that's not good for them. So they're very, very cautious about getting into a path. Now, if you give these same teachings to Hindus, most of the Hindus that come into the path, that are revisiting their old samskaras, you might say, then all of a sudden it's like, sure, I'll accept it. I want the mantra. I'll take the path. I'll do my best. And whether they make the grade or not, you don't see this guilt come over them as much. And so guilt, you could also connect it with remorse. Guilt and remorse go together. So udvega is a definite trap. Shoka, is interesting because we see that people of a very high caliber of consciousness have become bereft of loved ones. Avatars, great perfected beings, luminaries, sages, seers, yogis, probably not so much monks because they have renounced everything, but a lot of these beings who still remain in the world and have relations with people, they lose loved ones, and so grief comes to them. And of course that's a kind of natural thing, people are saying. But to keep grieving is not a natural thing. Once the Avatut was walking around and he saw this female monkey, and she was dragging this dead baby monkey with her. And so he sat down and meditated like he does. He would meditate on all these the minute he became aware of them, if they were in him. So he sat down and meditated on this monkey and watched her, and said, you're my teacher about attachment. I know that attachment is a real problem here. And she's grieving. She's grieving her dead baby monkey, but the thing was half decayed. She was still carrying it around. So he saw the nature of attachment and grief in one package in this animal. And then, of course, likened it to humans who act the same way. They'd be grieving for a lifetime, or grieving the loss of a baby or a child. And before the baby's even known to them, they grieve the loss of it. Is that sensitivity? That's a very good question. You could pose the opposite question: should we crush the stars to atoms and unhinge the universe? Because you're not going to be able to see that if you're grieving the loss of a child or a loss of a loved one. You can't let yourself be weakened by this. You have to remain strong in the face of all ills and all problems. So you're going to have that longevity of strength to carry it with you and pull yourself out of grieving. Sri Ramakrishna lost his nephew. It's a very great story once, and it was like he had never experienced grief before. He said, I felt like my heart was being wrung like a wet towel when I lost him. A couple days later, he had forgotten the incident. It was gone. It wasn't like, I think I have to forget this, let me drink or something, you see. I'll go hide in a bottle. Or it wasn't anything like that whatsoever. It was just there, and then it was gone. So you could see how illumined souls would take these things. Probably occurred to his mind occasionally, but he knew that the Atman was birthless. He knew the Atman was deathless. He knew that his nephew was the Atman, a manifestation of the Atman. And he could probably even meditate on him and contact him again in meditation, or see him in his higher dreams or so forth. Now, another example is Holy Mother loses Sri Ramakrishna, his divine consort, Sri Sharada, and she's busy taking off her jewelry like widows do in India, and taking off all the colors and just wearing a white cloth, becoming a Purda widow, God forbid. And so she's doing this, grieving about losing Sri Ramakrishna. He walks in the room, and she sees this vision of him, and he says, why are you taking off your jewelry and removing all the colors from your body? I haven't died. I've just gone to another room. And so she didn't act like a Purdu widow and a bereaved widow for the rest of her life, and not have any other choice in life but to become a slave to her in-laws or something. She retained him as her husband and her divine consort, and remained in a state of equanimity. And she definitely suffered by losing him, but grief wasn't a trap to her. He visited her. So let's say that you become so grieved that some ancestor is trying to reach you, some beloved one is trying to reach you through your dreams or through some some mechanism. Have you ever thought of this? I think, oh, maybe my great friend Lex Hickson will come back, or my deceased guru Swami Shishnanda will come back. But if I'm grieving them all the time, they can't reach me. It's like I've put up a knot in the channel through which they would reach me. See? So doesn't this connect with reason? If you've lost your reason, you see how these connect? If you lost your reason, you've closed down that avenue through which these souls can reach you, like Sri Ramakrishna reached Holy Mother, and or people have had visions of their ancestors and so forth, because of something as futile, ultimately, as grief. So you have to use reason to understand these things and know them to be deadly traps. And depression comes next. I mean, you don't know how often I've had to deal with that, and people who really have no reason to be depressed. They're living decent lives. They have food, they have water. They're not like people in India who are starving, I've seen, and so forth, living on the streets in a sleeping bag in the cold weather next to the pollution. They've got houses, they've got homes, they've got families, got friends, and they're depressed. So, what's the matter with you? And so they're dissatisfied. Oh, well, I can show you how that's actually a spiritual quality. If you're dissatisfied with family, friends, world, money, jobs, that's not a disease. That's called the doorway into renunciation. You see, that is a good thing. It's called world weariness in the scriptures, in our scriptures. And you don't have to take a pill for it or feel guilty, about having it. You could actually say, well, this is actually what Ram had at teenage years, and what Buddha had when under King Sakya, and when he left the palace. So people have experienced these things and turned them to a higher end. So some little comment here about guilt, grief, and depression. We could go on with depression a long time, but I actually want to breach this chart in the time remaining today so we can take up part of it, see the rest of it next week. So let's finish here with low self-esteem, vibranti. Vibranti is delusion. So there's a kind of delusion that low self-esteem, and we often talk about the ego, which was one of Sri Ram's problems. The unripe ego has two poles. One's called low self-esteem, and one's called pride. So when the ego is all inflated with itself and happy with itself because of any little thing it got, or any money it made, or any power it got over someone, or any object it attained, then it's all prideful. See, everything's right. Then those things get taken away, or something happens, and all of a sudden, low self-esteem, the ego shifts to its other pole. It was like a ping pong ball game, you see, falling and rising all the time. So this is why people see the ego and the gunas that go with it, because Sri Ram did mention the gunas in that reading I did out of Yoga Vashishta, the first half of the class. So they see that and they say, well, I think I'll detach myself from this. Thank you very much. I don't want to be pulled back and forth like a ping pong ball at a table, hit back and forth. So since we're there at the four deadly traps, let's see the quote that's next to it. The negative effects of actions done in the wrong spirit lead to a kind of remorse that is not only non-productive, but debilitating as well. Therefore, one should steer clear of the four deadly traps of guilt, grief, depression, and lack of self-worth. So when I saw that teaching, I had to put it down as a list to add it to this list of transgressions. Deadly traps, deadly sins, whatever you want to call them. Now let's go back up to the top with the three enemies of reason and look at its quote. Remember, egotism, intolerance, and narrowness. So Shankaracharya says, this ego is the enemy of the self. Right away you think, whoa, you mean the ego is the self? There's a higher self and a lower self. It's concealed like a thorn in the throat. Sounds like Sri Ram, doesn't he? The cherry pit. Even after it has been cut away, If it is attended to even for a moment, it will only revive again and cause hundreds of distractions, like clouds dispersing and gathering again in the rainy season. So that Adi Shankaracharya, the great teacher who lived to 32 years old and commented on all the great scriptures and created the 4 cardinal pilgrimage places around India and did so much to revive the non-dualism and Advaita Vedanta in India at the time when he lived, has that to say about these kinds of, this loss of reason, if you want to say that. Now, under the 3 stupefactions, we have this quote. We're talking about worldliness, insensitivity, and jadedness. By seizing upon, possessing, and brooding over sense objects, man desensitizes himself to the needs of others and becomes jaded. It's out of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So you can see that worldliness is involved with objects. You develop insensitivity around objects. You just take them for granted and use them for your own enjoyment. You become jaded with them. And so basically, objects in the world are to be renounced. Finally, let's end with Sri Ramakrishna's quote here to conclude this chart. He says, "What? Do you mean to say that one should first save money and then seek God? The worldly man spends thousands of rupees on his family, yet all the while his neighbors are dying of starvation." He is so insensitive that he can't even give them a few morsels of rice. He says to himself, "Let the rascals die, what do I care?" Then later one hears him talking glibly and guiltily about doing good to others. So a good quote there to fall right between the 3 stupefactions and the 4 deadly traps. Talks about the worldly man, basically, and his selfishness. So here we have accomplished a 3rd chart today, and we just have enough time, I think, to introduce the Granthis. So this has to do a lot with transmigration. So we're starting to segue out of transgressions into transmigration, the first 2 T's. So this will help us open that door to next week's class, which will be more about transmigration. I have a chart to show you on the palette of rebirths, how people can create rebirth for themselves and what the dynamics of that are. So that has to do with transmigration. Lower births, medium births, higher births. So basically, it has to do with that. So we have about 10 minutes or so we can look at this. What's happened here is that taking the teachings of Granthis that are in the Yoga Darshana, and both Vishishta talked about it and Patanjali talked about them, the idea of a Granthi is a knot. So I came up with a quote of my own here to explain this. Granthis are complex knots congealing in one's body and energy, as well as in the emotional, mental, psychic, and spiritual bodies. They impede the easy flow of spiritual force which otherwise keeps the aspiring human being fit and strong and healthy for the purpose of living a dharmic life. So you could see the skeletal nerve system example here, this red arrow going up, which is Kundalini. We call it spiritual force moving upwards. And this is what should happen to beings. Kundalini should be rising the minute they sit for meditation, or the minute they meet their guru in any given lifetime, the minute they hear the truth of the scriptures. That should have an effect on them to remember their past lifetimes, to remember the past teachings they've gotten, and they can see it right away. And the Kundalini is already flowing up to the crown chakra at that time, up the lotuses, we say. So basically, if there are Granthis in the way, it won't happen. So these kind of Granthis are Anagranthis, you can see next to that human figure, Pranagranthis, Hridaya Granthis, and Mana Granthis. Those are the 4 kinds of knots. Ana means food or body. So the body is supported by food. So we can list a whole number of this is where this class could stretch out for another couple of classes, so we would never get to the idea of transformation and transcendence. But we've had teachings like that, and they're available on YouTube for people who look into it. There's a new one that's called The Role of Food and Prana in Spiritual Life that was just posted a couple of weeks ago. 4 or 5 classes of it. So you can look at the role of food and prana in spiritual life. That's a very good class series. But anagrantis then, it could be anything from eating bad food so that your body can't operate right, and or it could be that you're not taking the food and subjecting it to blessing it and doing spiritual practice to raise it. So for that, you're going to need the prana to raise it. There's several Upanishads that state that better than any other yoga, the yoga of awakening the prana is best of all. So they're probably saying that because that's possible for people to do. Awakening the 7th chakra or getting the 3rd eye vision, that's not possible for most people, maybe glimpses. But you can, if you're sensitive, not insensitive, not jaded, you can raise this prana by doing certain practices, breathing, and by good food and by mantra and so forth. That's possible for people. It's a great path. And you don't want to let anything get in the way with it, like preoccupation with asana gets in the way. Worldliness and all these things, of course, get in the way. So you want to have that prana as given to you by an illumined soul teacher, and shows you how to awaken it. And even the Upanishads, like I say, these non-dual scriptures speak of that as a great path. So those first 2 then, I've kind of commented already on them, the anagrantis and the pranagrantis. Pranagrantis would be like, the outer manifestation of it would be, I can't breathe well. So it's not just shortness of breath that comes at old age. That's just the deterioration of the lungs and the body. But it's more like the inability to balance the breath. You breathe erratically. So just to sit and breathe, you talk about anger and lust. If you have those attack you, if you just sit and breathe, you can actually stave them off, at least for the time being. Otherwise, you lose your reason. See how all these are connected? If somehow I could take all of this and put it on one chart, you see, and show how, make all the connections somehow, that would, but we have to look back and think about what we've learned and contemplate it and make the connections ourselves. The great connections and these smaller connections, because these grantis will form otherwise, and then the life force will not flow unimpeded. It'll be stymied. You'll become stodgy, and you become lazy, and you'll become tamasic, and it'll be hard to break out of that. You'll get depressed as a result of all that. It's the sevenfold road to ruination that Sri Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita. So awakening the prana would be something that has to do with the breath. There's much deeper teachings in the breath. You just don't want to become a pair of bellows and huff and puff all day, and do some strange, weird breathing exercises and imbalance your brain, as Holy Mother said. But you do want to balance the in-breath, the held breath, and the out-breath, and the other kumbhaka, lower held breath. It's actually a kind of 4-stage process. So we've had also many teachings on that at retreats and in YouTube classes. But you can see how if you don't do it in this chart, there'll be knots in the prana. And that's where diseases kick in. You think that it's a problem in the body, so you go to a doctor and get a medicine. And our complaint with that is treating the symptom, not the cause. So there are some holistic health people who say, oh, I see your point. Yes, actually, there is a cause to it, but they're still looking for the cause in the body, in cells, in molecules, in science, in matter, in herbs. Those aren't where the solutions are. The solutions are in your prana being blocked. If you had prana flowing all the time, like the yogis, you'd hardly ever get sick. What about that? What about studying a person who hardly ever gets sick? He's never taken a medicine. He's never taken an elixir. He's never taken a drug. He's never gone to a doctor. I mean, I myself didn't go to a doctor till I was 50. So what about that? A person who's just kind of naturally balanced and healthy because he's breathing right and because he knows some secrets to the prana. One of the secrets of the prana is that you can escape grief, depression, and low self-esteem by connecting the udana to your brain. It's an upward moving prana that helps you to think about God, about teachings. Maybe you'll make 350 charts on it, because you connected a granthi, or you broke through a granthi and connected it. And so now you can flow along that path. Just like taking a machete and going through a jungle. I think I'll go back here tomorrow and walk that path, see. So, prana granthis, we could go on and on about them, but we're running out of time, so we'll pick this up next week there. Just let me mention that there are also granthis in the heart, the emotional body, and also the heart chakra, I think. I'll talk more next week about how the ancestors are there at that third chakra, the ancestor realm, lower heaven, we should call it maybe, and how it's hard to connect to the heart for them. So they come back to earth. They go to the lower worlds, back to earth, and like animals do and so forth. So basically, connecting to the heart is also a problem of a hridaya granthi, not opening up a channel to love of God. And then managranthis, really important. It connects very much like, for instance, with vibranti. Vibranti is delusion. So you have delusion because there are knots in your mind. If you could break through those knots in the mind, then you would be able to connect to your mind, and you could leave the brain alone. See, the brain's okay because it just needs some food and some breath. But the mind is the whole kingdom of heaven within you. Now I need to deal with that. I need to connect with it first. So these are some teachings. I hope you're as excited as I seem to be about discovering these anew. And we'll do that next week at the same time here at SRV Hawaii. And we'll course on beyond the transgression T, the first T, to the transitional T or transmigrational T. And in the meantime, let's all get a good cup of tea. And then we'll have 6 T's and all this. So here we'll end with a chant. Om Bhadram Karnabihi Shriyama Devaha Bhadram Pasyema Akshabir Yajatraha Stiraya Ranga Ishtushtavam Sastanavir Vishema Devahitam Yadayuhu. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual. May we hear with these ears what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshiping the Lord and Mother of the universe with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.